All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Today's session is hosted by 3M, and it is all about the power of purpose and manifesting your intention. We have the pleasure of being joined with Dr. Catherine J. Coleman from 3M. She is the SVP of Talent, Insight, and Acquisitions. She has over 20 years of experience in talent acquisition, diversity, strategy, policy, and project management. Please welcome Catherine to the stage. Welcome, Catherine. And we're also joined by Edward W. Hill. Edward W. Hill is the Vice President of Global Public Policy and Government Relations at Paramount. He's going to be our moderator today. He had previously worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative assistant, as well as for the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Reform. So please welcome Edward to the stage. And with that, we're going to get started.
Thank you.
All right, can everybody hear me? Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and Catherine, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
I'm really excited about this conversation. As someone who has been intentional in their career and focused on their purpose, I think this is a truly relevant conversation. And, I've been fortunate in my career to be able to blend my passions. But at times I've struggled with finding my purpose, understanding why I was in that role or what I was doing in that time, in that job. And so we're looking forward to talking with you and hearing your insights. So before we begin, we'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey. How did you get to this level working with 3M?
Thank you, Ed. So, Lexi read my bio. Here's what I would say. My journey has really been about being open. And being open to things that don't make sense. So I started my career in higher education. I never thought I'd leave higher education. I'm a PhD. I don't need to be in the private sector, So I just never thought I would leave higher education. I loved my job. I loved my work. I worked with diversity and strategy. I taught. I did research. I was like, ooh, this is the best job ever. I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. God had other plans for me. And sent a lot of signals, which I didn't receive. And finally, it was like, yeah, this is great, but the season has passed. And so I learned what I needed to learn. I learned how to work in a complex organization. I learned how to navigate politics. I learned how to, and I know that we talk a lot about corporate politics. Try higher ed. I'm just going to tell you, try higher ed. But I learned all of these things, and it was a relationship. I was on a board, National Society of Hispanic MBAs, when I was the director of diversity for the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. And a colleague who was on the board said, oh my God, we really need you at SuperValu. And I was like, yeah, I'm good. Oh, look, this job would be great, that job would be great. And I said, yeah, I'm good. And so I had a conversation with my brother, with my family, with friends, because I think that's the other thing. In addition to being open, don't keep your own counsel. I guarantee you people know more about you than you do. They have more insight into you, right? And, what my mother said is, well, why not? Why not? What's the harm? Why are you self-selecting out? You could be surprised. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll throw my hat in. Don't you know they offered me a job? Then I was like, wait, no, I love my job. I love what I'm doing. These folks are offering me a job. And I said, I guess I should do that, right? And so I moved to SuperValu, first leading diversity strategy. I also ultimately led executive recruiting, then all of recruiting for SuperValu. At the time, SuperValu was the third largest grocery retailer in the United States. So Bristol Farms, Cub Foods, a whole bunch of banners under that SuperValu. And I had a great team. I had built up a great team, was enjoying myself, thought, wow, this is it. Great, this is it. I have found a role. I am able to do even better for my family. I can take my mom on holiday every year. I'm good. This is what I want to do. And then a colleague of mine, who was a friend, who was at 3M, his name is Derek Carter. Said, hey, you should consider 3M. We've got a job leading U.S. recruiting operations. And I said to him, I'm doing that now. Why would I go to 3M to go do what I'm doing now? That doesn't make any sense. Well, just interview. And so then I talked to my, I talked to my circle. Why are you self-selecting out? Why don't you just try? Except my mom, who my team knows this. She hates 3M. Hated 3M. Don't go to 3M. Stay at SuperValu. They love you at SuperValu. She read every negative thing about 3M. She hated 3M. Don't go over there. Don't interview. Da 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 da. Like, she hated. I even mentioned it in my interview. I said, my mom hates y'all. She hates y'all. She hates y'all. I don't even know why I'm here. Because if I get this job, I got to tell her and she's going to be mad. So when she started talking to me again after I told her I was going to interview, she said, okay, when they offer you the job. Now, I hadn't interviewed yet. She said, when they offer you the job, ask for what you want, not what you think you can get. And I said, Mom, I haven't even interviewed yet. She said, oh, you're going to get that job. She said, you're going to get that job. So I applied, and I said, okay, yeah, I'm going to ask for what I want. And I said, hey, I'm already doing this already, so I need to, the only value for me is to get global exposure. That's the only value. And I need to have some dedicated dollars for my development. I don't want to ask for it. It needs to be there. That's all I could think of at that point. I'm like, that's all I want. In addition to negotiating salary, because everyone should be doing that. Yes. So, I got that job. And so I told my mom, I said, hey, she said, of course they did. Did you get what you want? I said, I did. So I started working at SuperValu, and SuperValu has been, I started working at 3M, and 3M has been an amazing company. SuperValu was an amazing company too. It's since been sold, so I can't speak to it now. But at the time, it was amazing. 3M has, I have traveled literally the world with 3M. And so being very intentional and asking for what I wanted at the outset, and the company delivered. And I think that's the other thing when I think about being purposeful and being intentional. Be really clear on what you want, and then ask for it. People can just, what's the worst thing they can say? No. Okay, well, now where are we? Okay, now we have more information. So I'm at 3M. I'm leading U.S. recruiting operations, and I'm there about a year and a half, and then the CHRO comes to me and says, hey, you seem to be really good at strategy because you picking apart everything we've done. What? Members of my team are here, so they know. Hey, we'd like you to look at the global strategy for talent acquisition. We want you to establish the global strategy. And I said, okay, yeah, that's great. That's the global exposure I asked for. That gets me into the spaces I wanted to get into. Perfect, I'm gonna do that. I did that, and then they said, hey, this is an amazing strategy. I said, thank you. They said, now go execute it. So then I became the global talent acquisition leader, which enabled me to get even more exposure, to get even more intentional, to have global teams, to travel the world. And then they came again and said, hey, this is great. You did this. This is great. What are the things that you really think you like doing? And I said, well, if you want to get the best out of me, point in a direction, tell me what it should look like, and let me loose. Or I can do this operational stuff that I've been doing. And they said, oh, okay, if you say so. So they said, hey, we want you to transform all learning for the company. 90 countries. We operate in more than 200 countries, 90,000 employees, 15 languages. I said, don't you want a learning leader to come do that? And they're like, no, you said. So go do it. I said, okay, well, yeah, I can do it, sure. And did. And we literally transformed learning at 3M from people flying around, right, because that was the traditional model, to, training that is 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours to 15 minutes, so consumable micro-learnings. Transformed that in less than 2 years. Stood up a global learning management system in less than a year. Launched a global learning month in less than a year. So if you imagine everybody across the globe as you follow the sun engaged in learning for an entire month across the company. And so I was really intentional around saying, okay, well, here's what I do. So I had to be real clear on where I was strong. They said, okay, we're going to pressure test that. And they said, okay, great. We agree. You're strong there. So now we're going to appoint you as a master black belt. You can keep this job because we think you have capacity, and you can go do something else. I say, no, wait. now we're talking too much. So I guess as I think about my career journey, what I would say is, a lot of times we're so grateful to be offered something. And we don't recognize the value that we bring. And it was really important for me to have people outside the company, people who are who I could consult, who I could engage, who I could say, hey, here's what's going on, what do you think? So they could help me remember, hey, you're bringing something to the table too. So a lot of times we get excited about titles. I like a title too. But what is the title bringing you? Is it enhancing your skill set? Is it helping to advance you forward? Are you getting P&L responsibility? Do you have direct reports? Are you filling skill and capability gaps by helping out the company by doing a certain role? So being really intentional has been, a massive accelerator for me. So let me fast forward to the role that I'm in now, which is leading talent, learning, and insights. And I will tell you at this level at 3M what we do, and I'm gonna give you a little bit of secret information because I lead succession planning. So at these levels, as some of you know or may not know, there's not necessarily an interview. There could be an interview, but there's not necessarily an interview. And folks are worked on succession tables, and whatever the mechanism is, you determine, hey, these folks are ready for whatever position. So I was identified as ready for the position I'm in now. Now here's a secret. And I'll tell you, somebody, and I won't tell you who, but it was one of our admins. Get real close to them admins. You treat everybody well. Not just your boss, not just your boss's boss. Treat everybody well. But somebody came to me and they said, so you want that job? I was like, yeah. And they said, did you tell anybody? I said, no. Maybe you should. And I was like, they see me here like I'm doing 2/3 of it now. Why do I have to tell somebody? She said, I don't know. You might want to tell somebody. And so I said, well, I got to tell somebody. I've been here, 11 years. I'm doing all this stuff. I'd like to see them bring somebody in here and do this job. And And I was like, well, wait a minute. Let me consult my circle. And I said, well, why don't you tell somebody? Is there a harm in telling somebody, right? And so the next call I had with the CHRO, I said, hey, after we got through all the business, I'm like, hey, just so you know, I can't pretend to not know that this role is open. I'd like that job. And I think I'm the most qualified. And she smiled at me and she said, thank you for telling me. A week later, I was appointed. So I think that's the other element about being intentional. A lot of times we don't ask for what we want. We wait to be recognized, and then we are upset when we're not. And what I would offer is the only person that needs to recognize you is you. And everybody else is confused, in my opinion. I'm like, if anybody doesn't recognize me, I'm like, wow, you're confused. But that's okay. I love you anyway. So those are the ways that my career has progressed. I think the other thing that I would say is I've been at 3M for almost 12 years now. I have held, I think, close to 7 or 8 roles. Only 3 of them existed before I got there. So, and I raised that because my ability to, or my willingness to kind of be vulnerable and say, hey, this is where I'm really strong, it enabled the company to say, this is what we need. If she's strong there, let's test it. And I was able to navigate that way. All companies aren't wired that way. 3M is wired that way. But it's an important thing to know.
Well, thank you. You certainly have an impressive career. And, in talking about 3M and the roles that, as you say, were created for you, it would seem to me like you were called to do this, right? And so, talk to me and talk to the audience a little bit about how your purpose, or how you think your purpose, has impacted you in these roles.
Yeah, thank you. So when I think about my purpose, I think about 3 things: my faith and my family. I think about the importance of reaching back. And I also think about the importance of being uber intentional. And so when I talk about my faith and my family, I love the work I do. We spend so much time at work. You have to like the work you do. Otherwise, it's just not going to be good for you, mentally, physically, emotionally. It's just not going to be good. And how my purpose my purpose is really centers around my family. I go to work so I can take my mom on vacation. I go to work to be sure that my family can be safe and secure. I go to work to be sure that my nieces are better off than I am. And my whole family operates this way, So just a brief story. When I went to college, I went to Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it's an expensive private college. My brother and my sister are twins. I'm the youngest of 3. They were also in college. My mom was a single parent. Macalester had flown me up, offered me, admission. They're like, we'd love to have you here. Your brother's here, blah, 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 blah. And we couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford 3. And so my brother and my sister were like, we'll stop. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. So that's how we operate, right? That's how we operate. So how does that play out in my work, right? My team knows First of all, and my leader, so I report to the CHRO, she knows the first thing I said when I was offered this role, I accept, thank you. Couple of things I just want to clarify. Anything that happens with my family trumps anything happening here. And I will not ask permission for that. I'm just, if I disappear, like I'll send you a text and stuff, but you should assume, we've all sent those emails. Hey, I've got an issue. I'm not sending an email. If something's going on with my niece, I gotta go. I'll let you know, but I have to go, right? Second thing, I eat dinner with my husband every night. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock.
It's early dinner.
Well, I tell you, it is an early dinner. It is. Here's why it's an early dinner. My husband works in a foundry, and he gets up at 2 in the morning. So for me to eat dinner with him, I got to eat at 5 o'clock because he's got to be in bed by 8 or 9, right? So I said, hey, I eat dinner with my husband every night. And I'll hit you back at 8:30. For sure. But between 5 and 8, and my team can testify to this. I'll be on the call, I'll be like, hey, and Mr. Coleman will come in and go, aren't you chopping lettuce for tacos? What's happening? Like, what are we doing here? Like, it's 5 o'clock, right? So I said, hey, I have dinner with my husband every night. And I said, I will be available outside of those two things and one last thing. And that was, when I take my mother on vacation, don't call me. If I'm on a family vacation, don't call me. Because that's intentional time with my family. But any other time, I'm there. Saturday, any other time, I'm there. And I will tell you, my leader has held very, very true to that. I was on a call with her and our CEO. It was 5:05. And I was like, Mr. Coleman was getting ready to bust in my office talking about cutting lettuce. And I was like, and my manager, my leader said, oh, and she paused the CEO. She said, oh, Catherine, I'm sorry. I realize we're over time. I think we're good. Are we good? So being really intentional. And also, it wasn't a list of 10 things. It's 3 things. You can't give me these 3 things? You might need to change companies. If you can't get 3 things, I might have been able to get 5. Yeah. So.
Appreciate that. I think we all can attest to trying to balance our family life, our work life, trying to be successful in our careers. As you talk about intentionality, purpose, have you run into any conflicts in living your purpose, in trying to provide for your family, but also be a successful person at 3M? Have you run into challenges, and if so, how did you handle that? How did you balance that? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So early in my career, at 3M, I had a leader who has since left, and this leader was very old school, and we all have old school leaders, right? But I was having, my husband's mother was ill. We had to go back and forth. I'm based in Minnesota, so we're driving to Gary, Indiana, which is about 6-hour drive, 5 hours if I'm driving. And so we were driving back and forth. I was working, didn't miss a meeting, was working from the hospital, whole nine. But my leader felt like he needed to see me and like just look at me. Because his office was next to mine and he would walk by and I wasn't there, but I was just getting emails and doing work. So next time I was in the office, he was like, hey, you're going to have to, stop going back and forth. I'm like, well, help me understand what hasn't been done. Well, nothing. Has something dropped? No. So you just want to look at me? I don't understand. Like, you might need to talk to Mr. Coleman. So then there was a tension there, and there was a conflict, and I remember calling my mom, who hates 3M. Wrong person to call. Go back to Super Value. They've been trying to get you back. I told you da-da-da-da-da. This is what she's saying. And I said, no, you know what, I'm gonna figure this out. And there are areas of recourse you can take. And so I, researched and figured out what I needed to do, to be sure that I could take care of my family, FMLA, talk to employee relations, you do things you have to do. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm sorry, whatever. I'm like, yeah, okay. But in that moment, I was completely prepared to leave. I was completely prepared to leave. I was prepared. I was like, I think I can get a job somewhere else. I could go back to supervisor. Like, I ran all these scenarios. Talked to my husband. He was like, well, you don't have to drive. I'm like, no. We're not, once you give an inch, you give a mile. So, and the company did the right thing, So, but I think that's the other thing. You have to be prepared to go. I have mentored a number of folks who keep waiting for the company to do the right thing by them. And I remember having conversations with one of my managers, and I was like, hey, I think this manager, I think you're underpaying me. And we have a process that you can initiate if you're being underpaid. I said, I'd like to initiate this process. Oh, well, it could come back lower. Doubtful, but I'm willing to take that risk. I'll take that risk. Let me go for it. And it took some time to work that through, but I ultimately got it scoped out higher, and I got the level that I needed. So there's an element of that as well. How are you researching? How are you working to be sure that you know what resources are available to you? And being willing to say, okay, what's my exit strategy if I need one? So.
And I like that you brought that up, fair compensation.
Yeah.
I think we all want to ensure that we're, compensated accurately,
yeah.
But also, compensated enough associated with the role. So talk to us a little bit about that. How did you know, how much money or how much you were receiving compensation for some of these roles? Or how did you go about that? Did you talk to people within the company? Did you do your research? Did you talk to outside folks? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, because I think we've got plenty of people in the audience who are, looking to make more money, I would assume. So we'd love to hear your insights there.
Yeah, for sure. So first let me say, I don't chase money. I do chase parity. I always chase parity. And I will tell you, by not chasing the dollar, I've made more money than if I did chase it. So what did I do? I leveraged my network, and it's important to keep a good, strong external network, so that you're not the only one talking to yourself. When you're in your subject matter, when you're in your area of expertise, it can be hard. There's some things that your circle may not know. And so you want to be sure that you have a strong network outside in your discipline, so you have an understanding. There are other things like Glassdoor, blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing, and I'm just going to speak plainly. I cost more. I'm an African American female. We're 13% of the population. Anything that is in low supply is in high demand, I cost more. And I'm not going to feel bad about costing more. I'm not going to feel bad about that. Let there be more of us, and then we'll figure it out. But right now, we're 13% of the population. We cost more. Like, why would you pay me the same amount as you pay Charlie? Charlie ain't me. They get a couple of counts on me on the equity, on the D&I stuff. So, I cost more. So, but I think being really clear and having those conversations, the way that I have managed it is understanding what's happening externally. People talk about comp. I don't like talking about comp in the company. It's messy to me. I find it messy. I don't think, I don't want that to sound negative to anybody else, but for me, I don't want to get in those discussions because it's usually people that are upset and not performing and blah, 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 complaining. So, but I do want to know that I'm being paid to market. And there's nothing wrong with asking. And so engaging your manager directly and saying, hey, and I always start with this, I love my job. I love what I do. I want to be here. I want to continue to be here. I also want to be sure that I'm being paid competitively. How do we do that together? What can I do? I don't know. What can you do? How do we step into that? I think the other thing is there are all kinds of ways to be paid. Right. All kinds of ways to be paid. It could be through retention. It could be through experiences. There are all kinds of ways. So think about what are the things that you value that you need, and all roads are not necessarily just straight compensation, but parity is important.
So I certainly have more questions, but I've been signaled to turn questions over to the audience. So is there any audience members that have questions for Dr. Coleman?
This one. Hi.
Hi, Christina, Senior Manager at Hilton. I just wanted to say your story is very beautiful, and I loved how you especially honored your boundaries as it comes to your family and making sure you spend that time and really create that space to hold with them. I did want to talk about, you have a tribe, you have a wonderful community around you, but where do you feel like you really trusted your own intuition and your own gut to make decisions and make sure you're heading on the right path?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, every time. So at the end of the day, a decision is yours. Getting counsel doesn't mean that other people are making decisions for you. It shouldn't be. But I think that what I have been grateful for and what I've benefited from are multiple inputs that ultimately inform my decision. Now, sometimes my decision is the opposite of the feedback I've received. But it's not because I didn't ask the question, and that's what I'm getting at. I think it's important to ask folks the question and kind of understand the different perspectives. You might be in this exact same place. But every decision you make is yours. I wouldn't recommend having other people make your decisions at all. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been at 3M because my mom hates 3M.
Thank you. I echo her gratitude for sharing your story. I'm Courtney Perry Calhoun. I'm a marketing leader at Amazon. My question for you is, you mentioned that you had 7 or 8 roles at your time at 3M. Can you talk about, as you were going through those roles, when you got to the point where you thought, it's time to move, how did you formulate that process? And then also, have you been in instances where you've made that decision and you got into the new space, you're like, oh, this is not what I thought. Can you talk about your bounce back? We heard about a little bit of bounce back yesterday. Love to get your insights on how you assess and then how you make that determination for remaining in your purpose to ensure that you're manifesting your intention. How do you create that process?
Yeah, so a couple things with each role that I moved to, I asked myself the same question: what's in it for me? Why should I move to this role? What am I going to get out of it? Am I going to get a capability? Am I going to get an increased exposure, like executive exposure? Like, just what am I going to get? Like, what's the benefit? And to be honest, if there wasn't necessarily a benefit, then I had to think about, okay, do I want to do this for other reasons, right? There might be other reasons that make sense. So I just kind of continued to work that tree. I will tell you, there was a time I was offered a role, and I said, yeah, no, I don't think I want that role. And I was offered the role again. Yeah, I don't want that role. And then the CHRO at the time called me on a Sunday. Catherine, are you going to apply for this role? And I said respectfully, no. Now, I knew for that decision, there was going to be a consequence, right? Because every decision you make, there's a consequence, right? But I knew that role was not a role I wanted. And I also knew that it was a role I felt that would pigeonhole me. Now, I knew why the company wanted me to do it. And I knew I could do it well. But it didn't serve me. It wouldn't serve me. And at the end of the day, I felt it would be detrimental. And so I had to respectfully decline that. Now, the implication of that, yeah, I was in a holding pattern for a little while. And I was fine with it, because I was like, hey, I made that decision. And the doors aren't locked. I can always go. But I enjoyed the work that I did and the roles that I was in prior to the, subsequent to that. And I absolutely made the right decision.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you for sharing your experience. My name is Donna Fortenberry, Chief of Staff at BP. I firmly believe, particularly in our community, any successful leader, half the battle is believing. What is one particular thing you believe about your future?
So, what I would say is nothing's impossible. A lot of times we self-select out. We're like, oh, that's not going to happen for me. No one's going to think that I can whatever. Or somebody else, these folks are more qualified. I'm sure that they're going to look at them, right? I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of unqualified people who don't look like us in jobs. It's amazing to me that we're the only ones that think we have to check every single box when everybody else has to check half the boxes. So I'm like, why not me? So that's what I think when I think of, I'm like, why not? Sure, why not me? Why can't I do that? Why can't I be an SVP at a Fortune 100 company? Why not? Sure.
Okay, truly one more.
Okay.
Thank you for taking my last question. Shelley Noble-Gregg's Office of D&I Nationwide Insurance. The question I have is, you mentioned about being intentional and the three things that you said were non-negotiables. At your level, oftentimes I feel like, that's applicable. How do you navigate that at the mid-level, manager, director level, when maybe you cannot be, or feel like you cannot be as intentional or make such an ask?
Yeah, I've said the same thing my whole career. I've said the same, it's no different. So when I was a manager, I said, hey, my family comes first. If that's a problem, happy to talk about it, but my family comes first. When I'm with my family, when I'm with my mother, I can't, I need the focus to be on my mom, right? 'Kay, I'm gonna tell you, 3M ain't coming to my funeral. They're not gonna say, oh, she was such a good worker. That's, you gotta think about the long term. And so I think there are ways to say it, there are ways to say it respectfully. You have a responsibility to be sure all your stuff is covered though, right? Sometimes people think they can just go. Well, you can't just go, but what you can do is you can say, hey, I'm going on holiday. Here's who's covering this. Here's who's covering this. Here's who's covering this. Here's what I've done on this. If you have questions on that, I am extra thorough to be sure everything is covered. And it means that you have to ensure that you're working through colleagues and colleagues you trust, and that you do that for them so that they can do it. And with my team, I model that with my team. When they're on vacation, I'm like, I had a colleague, I had a member of my team who called, taking their kids somewhere. I'm like, what you doing on the phone? What are you doing? Go do that. You know what I mean? So deeper in the, you can do it too. You can do that. You can say, hey, it can't be 10 things. It can't be 10 things. But if there are 2 or 3 things you're like, hey, this is really important to me, and you need, and I am committed to my role, I'm committed to it being successful, I will do everything that I am supposed to do in this role, but here are the things I have to be super intentional around, there's nothing wrong with that.
So we've got 2 last questions. But the first is, the last couple of years I think has been difficult for many people. We've been experiencing a pandemic. Right now we're going through an economic recession. There's been a lot of just civil unrest. What advice would you give to mid-level managers, but then also talk a little bit about how maybe your purpose has changed over the past couple of years, maybe in this role, maybe in your work life. Just want you to speak to that if you can.
Yeah, I would say I've doubled down on my purpose. Like to me, it's even more family oriented. It's even more doing things to ensure that my team know that their family comes first to me as well, right? It's been, even beyond the last couple of years, it's been a lot going on. And what has been increasingly important to me is where I work. Like, are we making decisions that align to what are important to me, right? 3M was like one of the only companies that has empowered employees to decide where they work. You don't have to come in the office anymore. You can work at home full-time, you could work hybrid, or you could come in the office all time. You could come in the office full-time. And everybody goes, how does that work? It's like, well, everybody was home during the pandemic, except our folks in production, obviously, and in the labs. So, and it's enormously significant to me that an industrial manufacturing company took a stand at a time when no one else would, and said, hey, this is important to our people. And because of that, it's a reinforcement of, ooh, I'm at the right company. Because you're making intentional decisions about people and what's important to them and keeping their family safe. So I just for me, it's just a double down. The one thing that I would say as a takeaway is take the time to be very clear on what makes you different. What differentiates you? That has been probably the most significant element that has propelled my career. Being able to say, hey, I'm great in the gray space. I'm great in white space. And there's been a lot of white and a lot of gray space. So there's a lot of demand. But companies need to understand, hey, if that's where you get your energy and you get excited, they want to know that. We want to know that so that you're doing the work that is going to be not only enriching for you, but you're ultimately going to, pay dividends to the company because you're going to do it that much better, right? So be really clear on what are the things, how do you describe yourself? And then tell people and continue to tell people. And then maybe one last piece of advice would be, please know your worth. I think when I was when I was where you are now, I thought I knew my worth. I didn't really. I was still very much in the, I was like, hey, I'm really grateful to have this job. Well, they're really grateful you're working. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And the minute, the minute that subsides, they'll be like, well, bye. So know your worth, know your value, and be really clear on what you're willing to deal with and what you're not. You gotta put those boundaries are super important. They're super important because they're important for your mental health, which in our community, we are struggling with our mental health. It's important for your physical health, and it just makes you a better employee. When I have dinner with my husband, I'm a much better employee than hearing this. Much better. I'm not annoyed, I'm not annoying, right? So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Well, we've been signaled, we are at time, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure our audience members have. Thank you all so much for your questions and for attending.
And thank you, Ed, for moderating, please.